Without warning, the Pakistani Air Force launched a series of cross-border airstrikes deep into the Paktika and Kunar regions of Afghanistan. These specific valleys are heavily agrarian and far removed from the centers of political power in Kabul, yet they became the targets of high-explosive bombardments. What began as fragmented reports on the ground was quickly verified by the United Nations, elevating the strikes from a localized incident to a documented violation of international law. While Islamabad justified the operations as targeted security measures, the UN confirmed a very different reality: 28 civilian deaths, primarily women and children. These strikes represent a blunt, unilateral exploitation of sovereign airspace, forcing neighboring powers to actively reevaluate the security architecture of the entire region. The mechanical reason these incursions are possible is incredibly simple. The Taliban regime currently controls a state with zero integrated air defense capabilities. This total defense vacuum leaves Kabul highly vulnerable, forcing the regime to look outside its traditional spheres of influence for immediate logistical and military partnerships. The primary power moving to fill this logistical void is Russia, seizing a sudden opening to re-establish a hard power foothold in Central Asia. Yet this creates a glaring paradox. India, the dominant economic and military heavyweight in the neighborhood, is remaining entirely passive, even as the Afghan populace directly appeals for New Delhi's intervention. India is executing a strategy of calculated inertia. New Delhi is deliberately sacrificing immediate regional influence in the Hindu Kush to insulate and protect its paramount grand strategic alliance with the United States. To control airspace, a nation requires anti-access area denial, relying on surface-to-air missile installations. Across Afghan territory, that infrastructure doesn't exist. This creates a kinetic vacuum. Foreign aircraft can cross the border, execute payloads, and return without encountering a single defensive barrier. The Pakistani Air Force exploits this vacuum by utilizing a mixed fleet of American and Chinese-origin airframes to conduct these uncontested bombing runs. To understand why Islamabad is conducting these strikes, we have to look inward. Pakistan is currently navigating severe internal economic instability and political fracturing. Launching cross-border airstrikes serves as a highly visible distraction. It projects aggressive military capability outward to mask deep systemic fragility at home. The military establishment records and uploads footage of these strikes online. The target audience is the Pakistani public, fed a steady stream of proof of capability propaganda. Because of the Afghan kinetic vacuum, the Pakistani military can execute this propaganda campaign with a 0% risk of pilot loss or airframe attrition. Islamabad treats its neighbors' airspace as a cost-free domestic marketing tool, precisely because the current geopolitical and military penalty for violating it is zero. Kabul's immediate strategic countermove to this vulnerability is a sharp military pivot toward Moscow to rapidly acquire the airspace denial capabilities it lacks. The recent public agreement struck between the Taliban and Russian envoys was initially framed to the international community as a basic maintenance contract. Decades of conflict have left vast quantities of broken, legacy Soviet military hardware abandoned across Afghanistan, providing an easy justification for Russian technical assistance. But this agreement functions as a logistical Trojan horse. Establishing a supply line for basic parts builds the foundation for major future defense contracts. The ultimate objective is the transfer of high-value hardware, specifically legacy Russian air defense systems like the S-300. The primary friction point preventing a standard transaction is capital. The Taliban regime is entirely bankrupt and lacks the liquid assets to purchase an S-300 system outright. Moscow overcomes this capital deficit by structuring the deal around asymmetrical payments. Kabul will likely grant Russian forces a forward military footprint inside Afghan borders. An active Russian A-2AD dome operating over Kabul would instantly neutralize Pakistan's ability to conduct uncontested strikes. There is a heavy historical irony here, an Afghan government actively inviting a Russian military presence back into the theater. Pakistan's pursuit of short-term tactical airstrikes has strategically backfired. By exploiting Kabul's weakness, Islamabad inadvertently invited a long-term Russian military foothold directly onto its western border. This brings us to the final geopolitical actor in this equation: India sits directly adjacent to this conflict as the dominant economic and military heavyweight. On the ground in Afghanistan, there is strong, documented public sentiment actively urging Indian intervention to deter further Pakistani aggression. New Delhi has responded with harsh, formal diplomatic condemnations at the United Nations, clearly calling out Islamabad's violations of Afghan sovereignty. This vocal stance stands in sharp contrast to the conspicuous silence from other regional players like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But this raises a central analytical question. Why does New Delhi categorically refuse to convert its diplomatic condemnation into material, hard power support for Kabul? New Delhi operates under a framework of calculated inertia. It is a highly risk-averse posture designed to prevent overarching structural damage to its broader geopolitical goals. The primary constraint is legal and diplomatic. The Taliban remains an internationally unrecognized and heavily sanctioned entity. Providing direct military hardware to Kabul would immediately trigger catastrophic diplomatic and economic friction with the United States. For New Delhi, the sheer scale and importance of the US-India strategic partnership takes strict precedence over any localized conflict. The modern axis between Delhi and Washington is defined by massive economic ties, technological integration, and deep military interoperability. India's inaction in the Hindu Kush is not a failure of capability. It is a deeply pragmatic calculation. The localized satisfaction of assisting Kabul is vastly outweighed by the imperative to protect India's grand strategic trajectory alongside the West. The Afghan kinetic vacuum is rapidly closing, marking a definitive end to Pakistan's era of cost-free aerial dominance. Russia has successfully exploited this friction, leveraging air defense diplomacy to wedge itself firmly back into the Central Asian power structure. The resulting geopolitical map shows a stark separation of regional spheres of influence. A Russian A2AD dome secures Afghanistan, while immense trade and data vectors connect New Delhi directly to the United States, completely bypassing the conflict zone. Pakistan's tactical overreach has effectively boxed it in. Islamabad now faces a newly defended border to its west and an economically dominant India to its east. By remaining rigidly disciplined, India successfully insulated its most critical global partnership from the volatility of its immediate neighborhood. This strategy comes with a permanent, unavoidable cost for New Delhi, definitively ceding the immediate security architecture of the Hindu Kush to Moscow. In modern great power competition, absolute inaction is a highly calculated maneuver, one that forces a permanent structural realignment of the entire geopolitical map.